Hello and welcome to the next YouTube Live in today's video. Today we are going to have another YouTube Live which you have already joined to watch, and in this YouTube Live we are going to do something which is very relevant today. So we are consistently hearing about topics like AI and data science and machine learning and deep learning and this and that and many things which are related with this. Today, everybody is talking about ChatGPT, everybody is talking about Gemini, everybody is talking about generative AI and many other things that are related with it. But have you ever thought that what is basically the basis of out of all of these things? Well, whenever we talk about any of these topics, we need to understand where they are all coming from. To be honest, if you notice or if you start to go very deep into all of these topics, you will see that they are mostly mathematics, statistics, and a lot of computational neural networks. Now, whenever we talk about these kind of topics, we will have to include a lot of programming which needs to be done whenever we want to develop something like this. Let me try and talk to you about something extremely relevant that we all have seen. We all like to listen to our favorite music, right? And we all use our own favorite music playing application or music streaming application to listen to our favorite music. Now, it can be Spotify, it can be Apple Music, it can be Amazon Prime Music, it can be YouTube Music, or it can be any application of your choice. Similarly, you might want to use Netflix or Amazon Prime, or in case if you're from a different country, then you might be using Hulu, or you might be using Disney Hotstar, or whatsoever. Whatever you might use, you will always see something called as recommendations. So let's say today you decide to play, let's say, a newer album by Taylor Swift into your Spotify library. So let's say you're playing a new Taylor Swift album and you just finished listening to it. So after you are done listening to it, the next song that plays automatically inside your Spotify playlist or inside any music application's playlist is probably a recommendation that this application thinks that you might like. In my personal opinion, every single time I listen to a song that is recommended to me, I actually do like it. So I want to ask you this one question, that how are these things actually figured out? How does this mobile application, which knows very little about me as a person but only listens to my music, can figure it out that what song I might actually like? So there is a lot of computational programming that happens behind the scenes which we might not even think about. And this kind of computational programming is basically the ideas of machine learning. So anytime on any platform, wherever you see something called as recommendations or predicting something or whatsoever, there is a very high chance that some sort of programming or very strong computational programming is behind the scenes acting up to provide this information to you. Whenever we talk about this kind of activity on the internet, we cannot stop talking about the Python programming language, because machine learning, deep learning, or computational neural networks, they're mostly programmed in the Python programming language, and that is exactly what we are going to talk about in today's YouTube Live. So, in today's YouTube Live, we will try to cover very basics of Python. Python is a very modern programming language, and it has a very unique syntax whenever people want to learn it. As somebody who might be learning programming for the very first time, Python might come very easy to you. Python is usually used at multiple locations. It is a very multi-dimensional language. It can be used in web development, especially in backend side, by using Django or Flask. You can use Python for game development. You can use Python for desktop application development. You can use Python for a lot of data analysis tools and data science related information. And you can use Python a lot for machine learning, deep learning, and neural networks as well. There is a very high chance that things like ChatGPT and Gemini are also having at least some chunks of code which are written in Python. Python is extremely beneficial and is extremely utilitarian when it comes to the IT industry. There's a very famous CLI, which is command line interface, which is owned by Amazon, and this command line interface is called as SAM CLI, SAM CLI. Here, SAM stands for Serverless Application Management, and AWS provides this command line for the developers who want to create serverless applications completely hosted on AWS. And to be honest, I personally love coding with serverless environments. So even the SAM CLI is completely coded on Python. So you can imagine the importance of Python in the world of IT industry. Secondly, a lot of people and a lot of companies, especially Microsoft Azure and AWS and Google Cloud, they have created platforms in their cloud services in a way that support Python very, very well. So it's just an additional point for you to understand how important Python can be as a programming language in general when you want to pursue a career as an IT engineer. Let's go ahead and start to see how we can run Python related codes into our own machine, and we will try to learn a little bit of Python as well into this YouTube live video. All right, so I'll go to my screen and I'll help you install the right software for you so that you can run Python on your own machine. For this, the first thing that I will do is I will open my browser and I will write in the search bar Python. Okay, so I'll just wait for it to search something, and we see a lot of information coming up on the screen. You need to go to www.python.org. Once you go here, you will see the information related with Python. So the very first thing that we need to do is we need to go into downloads, and then you need to click on download Python 3.12.3. So at the time of making this video, the latest version of Python is 3.12.3. You can click on download and it will download on your machine. Whether you're using Linux or Mac or Windows, the instructions for installation are going to vary. Especially if you're on Windows machine, make sure that the installer that you download, it adds the path of Python into your system. Usually that checkbox is unchecked by default, so you will need to make sure that that checkbox is added or checked at the time of installation. In my particular case, I already have Python installed on my machine. This particular software is very important for you to run Python on your machine. Okay, so I won't go ahead and download it because it's already downloaded on my machine. But in case if you need to download it, in case if it's not already present on your machine, you need to download and install it. It's a very simple process. For Windows users, Python is also available on Microsoft Store. So you can also go ahead and download it from there. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do is I'll open my terminal. And on my terminal, I will write Python space dash and capital V. Okay, I know why this is happening, because in a Mac environment, whenever we want or whenever we have downloaded Python and have installed it, to access Python related information, we need to write Python 3. But in case of Windows, you just need to write Python. Even in Windows, if you write Python 3, it will work. But in Windows, Python is just enough. But Mac usually wants you to write Python 3. Otherwise, there is no difference. So in this case, as you saw, as I wrote Python space dash V, it did not recognize Python. But as soon as I did Python 3-V, it recognized it and it printed the version of Python which is installed on my computer right now. So in case if you notice, I am not currently on the latest version of Python, but it's fine. It's not relatively too old, so it won't really cause any sort of issues and errors at the time of us writing our very first Python code. Let us go ahead and now start writing our Python code. Okay, so for this, we will need a code editor. And in this case, I choose to use Visual Studio Code for our Python related code bases. Okay, so let us go to a new folder. This is currently a Node.js program that is currently open on my screen, which I don't want to use right now. So I will click on new. Okay, yeah, I'll click on new window. I'll click on open folder. Okay, over here, I'll go to A, then I'll go to Tutorac, which is probably inside self, then Tutorac, and here I will write Python live. Okay, and I'll open this folder. So I'm currently on a folder which is known as Pythons-live. Okay, so this is the folder where I'm in. Whenever we want to create a new Python file, its extension is always going to be .py. So I will create a new file, and let's say I name this file first.py. Okay, you will see a cute little Python symbol at the left side of the name of the file. So this is our very first Python file, which I have written as first.py. Whenever we talk about a programming language, we need to start with understanding how to create two important things. First is how do we declare variables, and second is how do we create functions. Because ultimately any programming language is just logic which are created with the help of variables and which are written inside functions. So we need to understand how do we create variables inside Python, and secondly, we need to understand how can we actually create functions inside Python. So these are the two things that we will be covering right now. This will require you to have information of what is a function already, from any other programming language, but in case if you just don't have it, don't worry, I will go on and tell it to you anyway. Okay, so let us talk about creating a variable inside Python programming language. Whenever we talk about creating a variable, especially in programming languages like JavaScript or Java or C# or even C++, we always need to write the type of variable, except in JavaScript. We write something called as let or int or anything else which specifies a variable followed by an is equal to, and then we write the value of the variable. For example, if I have to write a variable inside Java, I'll write int a equals 5, which means that the type of int or the type of a is actually integer and its value is equal to 5. But in case of Python, there is no variable related keyword. So there are too many variable related keywords that are installed or instituted in a lot of major programming languages other than Python. But in Python, we don't really have any such keyword installed in Python. We just write variable name is equal to variable value. That's it. That's the pattern. So in this case, suppose if we want to create a variable a equals 5 in Python, it's as simple as writing a equals 5. That's it. That's how we create a variable inside Python. So a equals 5. Let's say I want to create a new variable. I'll just write b equals 10. That's it. And now let's say I want to add both of them. So I'll create sum equals a plus b. And that's it. And guess what? In case if we want to print something, we just write print. We don't even have to deal with system.out.println or cout or console.log or whatever. We have to deal with none of these things. We just write print. As simple as it could be. So we write sum over here. Now, when you want to run your Python file, you need to write Python. In a max case, you need to write Python 3 and then the name of the file. As soon as I write its name, you can see that it prints 15, which is exactly what we wanted. So yep, this is how we have created our very first Python file. And this is how we can create variables also in Python. In Python, variables are dynamically understood, or their types are dynamically understood. So in this case, the type of b is actually a number or literal, whatever you can see over here. Suppose if I add a third variable over here and I give its type as a string, and let's say the name of the person which I'm trying to write, or let's say I write a new variable called as name, and the value of this name is Vinay. Okay, so over here you can see that name will automatically be understood as a string. So in case of Python, I did not have to tell it that the type of name is actually always going to be string. So it is totally understood internally by Python. The same thing also happens in JavaScript. On the other hand, suppose after writing name equals Vinay, suppose I change name equals to 10. So you can see that it does not throw an error. If I try to run this code, it still does not throw an error. That means changing the type of a variable is 100% possible in a programming language like Python, but not possible in programming languages like Java, C++, and etc. etc. So this is one thing I wanted to show you. So no matter what your variable is, you can always just write the name of the variable followed by an is equal to and then the value of the variable. The next thing you need to keep in mind is that it is dynamically understood and changing the type of variable is also possible. Okay, so this is how we have understood about creating variables. Now let us talk about creating functions. So I'll remove it all. And before I actually talk about functions, in case if anybody watching this video is new to the idea of functions, let me just tell you what it is. Suppose if you have a reusable piece of code or a piece of code that you want to reuse at multiple places. So in general, this type of code is reusable in nature. So you can put this code inside a function. You can put this code inside a function. So a function is nothing but a reusable piece of code. For example, let's say if I have to talk about in plain mathematics terminology, so whenever we were studying, or at least when I was studying mathematics, the idea of functions came to me from a topic called as relations and functions. Now in this topic, completely speaking mathematically, there was a concept of something called as y is equals to f of x. Here, y is the dependent variable and f of x is my function, where the name of my function is f and x is my independent variable because y is completely dependent on x. Now let's say if I write something like this, y is equals to x multiplied by x, which is the square of x. Okay, so what does it mean? It means that y is dependent on x in such a way that if you square x, you will find y. Okay, that means the definition of f of x is written something like this. F of x definition is multiplication of x with itself, right? So this is completely talking in mathematical sense. Now here, what is the name of, or what is f over here? F is the name of my function. Now because it's a name, I can choose to name it whatsoever I want. Suppose I change its name to something called a square. So I want to say square is a function which wants, or square is a function of x which has to return x multiplied by itself. Okay, so this is how we can write a function inside mathematics. When it comes to Python as a programming language, it's very simple as how it is written inside the mathematical terms. So in order to create a function, we use a keyword called as def, def, def. This particular keyword is actually going to understand that we are trying to create a function. So def and then followed by the name of the function, which in this case is going to be square, followed by a set of parentheses, square, right? Square. Followed by a set of parentheses, which you can see in yellow, which define what are the variables that this function is going to be dependent on. So because x is the only independent variable over here, so inside the brackets, I will write x, followed by a colon, which is going to tell me that now I need to write the body of the function. If you're extremely new to Python as a programming language, but you know programming in general, from your different other programming languages ideas, you might have seen that whenever we want to write a body of a function, or whenever we want to write a block, we always use the case of curly parentheses. But in case of Python, we don't use curly parentheses at all. We actually make use of indents. That means shifting our code left and right on the basis of what is the parent of that particular code. So in this case, as you can see, my cursor is currently on slightly right side of what def is written on, which means every single thing that is written on the right side of def, that means that it is going to be under it, as long as not it is going to be defined by any other parent. So in this case, any piece of code I write over here, it is all going to be under this particular function. So here I will write return, oops, my caps lock is on, so return x multiplied by x. That's it. In case of Python, we don't use semicolons at all. So I don't need to write a semicolon. So here, this is my function, def square x, and it returns x multiplied by x. Okay. Now suppose if I want to call this function, I will just write the name of my function followed by the value I want to use. So let's say I want to use 5. Now whatever value I'm getting, let's say squared underscore value is equals to square of 5. UA. Squared value is equals to square of 5, and then I will just print it, squared value. Okay, let's try to run it. And yep, I do get 25 as my answer. All right, so this is how we can actually write a function as well inside our Python programming language. Now, using this idea of function, let us go ahead and see how we can do conditional programming inside Python. So Python has the idea of conditional programming, just like any other programming language, but it is slightly different. So Python as a programming language does follow or does support the idea of of if and else, but it does not support the idea of switch and case. So at least about the latest version of Python, which is released as of now, it does not support switch and case so far. So we will see the conditional programming with the ideas of if and else if statements only. So let's go ahead and see how we can do it. Okay, so now we have understood that there is a data type which can store sentences or names or strings in general. Okay, so let's do something like this. Let's say that we are going to consider a situation where the user is going to give us 3 colors. Let's say red, green, and yellow. And on the basis of whatever color a end user is choosing or a consumer is choosing, we will tell them what is the total units of that color we have with us. Suppose that is what we want. So let's say that the colors are, red. And let's say for red we have 100 units. Then let's say we have green. Then for green, let's say we have 50 units. And let's say we have yellow. And let's say we have 60 units for yellow. Okay, 60 buckets of 60 buckets of yellow paint, and 50 buckets of green paint, and 100 buckets of red paint. Okay, let's say I write a function def get underscore color underscore bucket underscore count, something like this. Okay, and then somebody will have to tell us what color they want or what colors count they actually want. Okay, So we will write if color double equals red. If color double equals red, then I will write print 100. And then I will write ELIF. Now what is ELIF? ELIF stands for else if. So there is a conditional flow of something called as if and else. Before I write else if, let's say I just write else, followed by this, I will write print not red. And if I run it, I'll have to call this function before that. So let me just call it. So get color bucket count. And let's say the color is green, for example, green. Okay, if I run this, you will see it says not red, which means that if this particular condition is incorrect, then the code will go to the else block. Okay, so whenever we want to use conditional programming, we will have to make use of if and else conditions. The if will always have a condition which must always and always resolve to a true or a false value. So in this case, we see color double equals red, which means I'm trying to check if color's value is equal to red or not. In case if it is equal to red, that means it's true, otherwise it means it's false. In this case, we are passing green, so this particular condition is false, because of which the code is going to the else block. So that is what is the meaning of else and if. So there cannot be any else block without an if, but we can have an if without an else. So that is one thing you need to remember. All right, coming back to our previous problem statement, in case if we write ELIF, it stands for else and if together. What does it mean? So if a specific if condition fails, then the code will go into else block. Okay, this is something we have already understood. Now, inside this else block also, if you want to make sure that only this else block should run on a specific condition, then in that case, we make use of an else if condition. So if the first condition fails, you want to check for a second condition and so on and on, then in that case, we make use of an else if statement. This is also called as an else if ladder. So here I have color equals red, then print 100. If else if color equals to green, then I'll say print 50. And lastly, else if color equals yellow, then I'll print 60. And lastly, I will write else. That means if none of these conditions are true, then I will write print not a valid color. Something like this. I'll save it and then I'll run it. You see it says 50. Okay, let's try to add a separate color like black. Black. I'll run it and it says not a valid color. So technically it's working absolutely fine. Okay, so we did try to talk about conditional programming as well in Python. Now that we have spoken about conditional programming as well, I would like to introduce you to the idea of something called as loops in Python. Let's talk about what is a loop. Loop is nothing but a piece of code that needs to repeat for a certain amount of times. Sometimes we know how many times we want to repeat it. Sometimes we don't know how many times we want to repeat it. And we have three types of loops present in programming in general. One is called as for loop, the other is while loop, and the third is do while loop. Out of these three, the do while loop is probably the least used loop, and for and while are the most widely used loop. In my opinion, and based on my experience, I would say for loop is probably the most widely used loop so far. Okay, let us try to understand how these loops would work. The for loop is basically one of those loops in which we know how many times we want to run this loop. While loop is usually this loop in which sometimes we don't know how many times we want to run this loop. Okay, let's say you want to print a value, let's say somebody's name. For example, let's say I want to print tutorac, but I want to print it 5 times. Then in that case, what do I need to do? I'll write print tutorac, T-U-T-O-R-A-C, tutorac, okay? And let's say I want to print it 5 times. I'll copy this and I'll paste it 5 times, 3, 4, and 5, okay? So if I run this, you will see that tutorac is getting printed 5 times, okay? And it is absolutely fine, okay? But what if this number is very, very large? Let's say 100 times. In that case, do you expect software engineers who get paid hefty amounts of money to sit and just write repetitive piece of code? Probably not, because that's a waste of their time. So we can make use of this kind of an application with the help of a loop. So we will try to use a loop in order to print tutorac 5 times. So like I told you, in this case, we know how many times we need to print this particular statement. So we can make use of a loop called as for loop. Let's make use of this for loop in order to print tutorac 5 times. I'll comment it out and then I will write for. And inside for, I will write I, and then I'll write in range. In range, I think it should be 0 to 5. Yep. So for I in range 0 to 5, it means that I will start from 0 and it will end at a value which is less than 5, which in this case is going to be 4. So i's value is going to be 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, and then 4. Okay. And then in this case, I will write print tutorac. Okay. Suppose I run this code and you can see tutorac getting printed 5 times. Suppose if I increase this value to, let's say, 60, save it and run this file, you will see that tutorac has been printed 60 times. Okay, so this is how we can make use of a for loop. Here, I is the current counter of how many times this particular loop is running, and range is specifying a start and an end to our for loop. Okay, that is how it is working. So with the help of this range function, we can actually iterate from start to an end, basically by actually increasing or decreasing the value of I by 1. Okay, that is what we do. So in this case, the value of I is in an increasing order. But what if we wanted to do an in decreasing order? In that case, I would have written 60 to, let's say, 0 followed by a -1. In this case also, it would print the value 60 times. Okay, so what would happen over here? The value of I would range from, or would start from 60, would end at 0, and then the current value of I would actually be increasing by -1 every single time. Notice I'm saying will increase by -1 every single time, which is also equivalent to say that it will decrease by 1 every single time. So yep, that is how we can make use of the for loop inside Python. Now let's talk about the while loop. So while loop is usually this loop, which we can use every single time we know the number of times we have to run this loop, but also when we don't know how many times we have to run this loop. Depends on the situation. Okay, it will totally depend on the situation. For example, let's say I write while. Okay, while, and inside while you can see that I have written a parenthesis. Or even when I don't have a parenthesis, I can still, let's say, write while and then some condition. Okay, so while loop will basically run until a certain condition is true. Okay, while loop will actually run until a certain condition is true. While loop does not know when this condition will go false, and therefore will continuously be running as long as the condition is true. Okay, so in this case, suppose if I have to consider a similar scenario where I want to print tutorac 5 times, but with the help of a while loop, then how will I do it? So it's simple. What I will write, let's say, count as, let's say, 0. So while count is actually less than 5, until that case, I will be running my loop. And then inside the loop body, I will write print tutorac. Okay. And then lastly, I will write count is equals to count plus 1. So in this case, I am trying to run this program. So you will see that count is actually 0. And then while we'll check whether the current value of count is less than 5, which in this case it is, it will print tutorac, and then the value of count will increase by 1. Then it will come back here again. It will see that the value of count is actually 1, which is again less than 5. We'll print it, increment it, print it, increment it until the value for count becomes 6. As soon as it becomes 6, or even when it becomes 5, this condition will fail and the loop will stop running. So let's try to run this now. And you can see that it works, or it prints it 5 times. So this is how we can also see how loops actually work in Python. So this was pretty much it from my side in this video. Let me go ahead and see in the comment section in case if you have any questions. So as of now, I don't see any questions in the comment sections right now. But in case if you have any questions, please feel free to write that question down inside the comment section, and I will try to get back to your question as soon as I can. So yep, on this note, I will be closing today's video. To stay tuned for more videos like this, make sure you subscribe to our tutorac channel, and I will see you in the next live. Until then, stay connected with us at tutorac.